When my phone buzzed that night, I expected the usual family chaos, nothing new, but it was one sentence, sent by my own brother, that cut deeper than anything they'd ever done. "Don't come to the BBQ. Madison says you ruin the mood." No explanation, no hesitation, just silence from everyone else, as if agreeing that I didn't belong, not even in my own family. I stared at the message until the words blurred, realizing something I had ignored for years. They never wanted me there in the first place. "I'm Aurelia Finch," and that was the moment I stopped pretending I still had a family. Denver had a way of holding its breath at night, the kind of stillness that made every notification on my phone feel louder than it should. I'd just finished stacking a few documents on my kitchen counter when the group chat lit up, a tiny flash that pulled my attention like a thread snapping tight. I opened it without thinking, just another message from home, I assumed. Something trivial, something loud, something that had nothing to do with me until they needed it to. What I saw wasn't trivial. It was a reminder, a sharp, familiar sting pressed right against an old bruise I'd spent years covering up. No one asked what led up to it. No one wondered whether it was too harsh. They just reacted, quick and careless, as if agreeing that excluding me was the easiest solution, as if the weight of those words didn't land on an actual person. I stood there in the half-dark, my apartment lit only by the soft hum of city lights bleeding through the blinds, and felt that old, unwelcome truth rise in my chest again. I had walked away from Texas thinking distance might soften what had always been broken between us. But there it was, laid bare in a single-line proof that nothing had changed, except the miles. A familiar heaviness settled behind my ribs. Not surprise. Not really. Just the quiet ache of recognition. I typed one word back. Steady and small. And set the phone face down on the cold wood. That was all it took. One message, one moment. And the ground beneath my family began to shift in ways none of them could ever take back. The next morning unfolded with the same crisp efficiency my workdays always had, at least until my assistant appeared at my door with a look that didn't match the usual rhythm. She told me 2 visitors were demanding to speak with whoever approved private investments, and that they refused to give their names. Something in her tone flicked at the back of my mind. A quiet tug of recognition I didn't want to acknowledge. I stood up anyway. I took the short walk to the small conference room, expecting venture hopefuls or some overeager founders, but when I pulled the door open, the air shifted. Noah and Madison stood in the center of the room, and for a split second, none of us moved. I didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. They were the last faces I expected to see in a place they never bothered to understand. Madison's eyes scanned me from my shoes to the badge clipped to my blouse. The confidence she wore like perfume cracked just enough to show the truth underneath, before she tried to force a smile back into place. Noah didn't speak. He dug his hands into his pockets and stared at the carpet as if it held the answers he needed. Madison set a sloppily bound pitch deck on the table, its title misspelled so boldly I wondered if she'd even noticed. She spoke to me the way she spoke to baristas and store clerks, with a tone that assumed compliance. She made her demand, pushing the number across the table as if generosity were owed to her. I denied her request without raising my voice. She exploded without lowering hers. I watched her unravel, each word sharpening the picture I'd been pretending not to see for months. She stormed out, Noah trailing after her like a shadow that wasn't sure which way the sun was moving. And just when I thought that was the end of their chaos for the day, a security officer intercepted me in the hallway and handed over internal footage. Madison had tried to slip into restricted access before finding the conference room. So they hadn't come for a conversation. They'd come with a plan that smelled exactly like every mess I had spent years escaping, and the stench of it lingered long after they were gone. Late that afternoon, while reviewing a contract revision, a message from my bank appeared on my screen. A loan for $180,000 was pending verification. My chest tightened, not in panic, but in certainty. Whoever submitted that application knew things they shouldn't. I opened the attachments. The signature looked like mine. If mine had been copied by someone who only understood the shape of the letters, not the pressure of the pen. A scan of my old driver's license, the one I'd lost years ago, was clipped to the form, and the listed address belonged to Noah's house. I immediately locked the application, but instinct told me this was only the beginning. I pulled my credit report, something I hadn't done in months, and the page filled with transactions I hadn't made. A credit card opened over a year ago with a balance past 20,000. A medical bill tied to my name with Noah, labeled as my dependent. An online loan in dispute that I'd never seen before. The timestamps painted the clearest picture. Most submissions were made after 1 in the morning, the hour Noah usually sat awake scrolling through his laptop, letting the world blur around him, just as the dread settled into something solid. A muffled thud hit my front door. I froze, then walked over, half expecting nothing, but a yellow envelope lay pushed through the crack. The kind used when someone wants to hide more than they want to help. Inside was a 34-page private investigator's report. Every page screamed one name, Madison, her past bankruptcies, lawsuits, manipulations, and the quiet destruction she'd left behind her. And on the back of the final page, in handwriting I recognized instantly, was a message from my father, shaken, uneven, almost apologetic. He had known something was off. He had seen the signs. And he had stayed silent until now. The envelope trembled slightly in my hands as I stood in my kitchen, realizing the truth I had avoided for far too long. My family hadn't just overlooked me. They had been living inside a storm I didn't create. And somehow, pieces of it were already breaking through my walls. I spent the whole night studying the report my father had sent, tracing every detail until the patterns burned into my mind. When dawn finally broke, I returned to the office with a tight resolve. Madison wasn't improvising. She had a system, and I needed to know how far she'd gone. The moment I opened my laptop, an alert flashed an attempted login from Austin using my work credentials. It confirmed the intruder ran through my old passwords in perfect sequence. The only people who could have known those were the ones who had sifted through my old paperwork at my parents' house, and Madison had spent plenty of time looking for decorations in those drawers. Before I could fully absorb the violation, Noah called. Behind him, Madison's voice cut sharp through the speaker, telling him not to explain anything to me. He asked if I'd sabotaged their loan, using the word they as if they were a single unit now. Something in me hardened, and I ended the call. That night, I flew to Texas to meet Madison's ex at a cafe near Lady Bird Lake. His exhaustion told the story before he spoke. He showed me emails Madison had once used to manipulate him into co-signing loans, same tone, same phrasing, the exact blueprint she used on Noah. When I asked whether she'd repeat the pattern, he didn't hesitate. She always needs someone to cover the last mess she made. His answer settled over me like a cold weight. I wasn't imagining it. I was the next target. When I walked back to my car, the wind whipping off the lake couldn't cut through the heaviness. A black SUV sat across from me, the window lowered. Madison stared back, calm and confident, as if she'd been watching the entire time. Her smile wasn't anger, it was certainty, like she believed the game was already hers. I flew home at sunrise, unsettled by the feeling that the surface I'd scraped was nothing compared to what lay beneath. I combed through my credit report again, this time slower. One line stopped me cold: over $8,000 charged to Plains Logistics LLC, the fake company Madison proudly pitched at my office. She'd used a credit card under my name to legitimize her fraud. When I called the company number, Madison herself answered in a bright, scripted tone, oblivious to who was listening. I sent everything to my attorney, froze my credit, and checked my email. More than 20 password resets had been triggered across banks and services I hadn't touched. Someone was trying to pry open every door of my life. Then Noah called, torn between fear and loyalty, repeating Madison's claim that I was ruining everything. When I asked whether he'd seen her use my information, the silence that followed said enough. Minutes after he hung up, a text from an unknown number warned me to stop digging if I didn't want my past exposed. I forwarded it to my attorney and kept going. That evening, my father appeared at my door, older and heavier than I remembered. He handed me a USB. On it was a recording of Madison pressuring Noah to use my SSN, laughing at the idea of blaming the bank if caught. Hearing his trembling voice nearly buckled my knees. Before I could recover, my laptop chimed again. My corporate account had been locked due to another breach attempt from Austin. They weren't just after my identity anymore. They were coming for everything I'd built. And that was the moment I understood the fight had only just begun. The email locking my work account told me everything I needed to know. Madison wasn't satisfied with wrecking my credit. She wanted to gut the one thing I'd built without help from anyone. I got to the office before anyone else, opened my backup laptop, and began pulling every trace of the breach. The logs lined up in a way that felt personal attempted access during the exact hours Noah was home. It sent me screenshots with timestamps, showing someone cycling through my old password combinations. Not guesses, not random. Someone who'd handled the documents I thought were long gone. I added everything to a folder labeled Evidence and called my attorney. His voice hardened as he read through the files. This isn't just identity fraud anymore. This crosses into federal territory. The words hit me with a cold finality. I'd known things were bad. I hadn't realized they were criminal on this scale. Later that afternoon, I flew to Austin and stopped by the old family cabin, the one my parents sold to pay down Noah's debts. The new owner let me look around, and in one of the small bedrooms, an old cardboard box sat untouched. Inside it were my missing tax forms, banking records, and income statements all slid open and resealed with clear tape. Madison had lived in this room before the wedding. She hadn't been looking for decorations. She'd been looking for me. I stepped outside and called my father. His sigh carried years of things he never said aloud. He admitted he'd seen her going through drawers once and convinced himself she was searching for old photos. He'd stayed silent because silence was easier than confronting what he already suspected. As I drove back toward the city, my mother called. Her voice trembled, not with concern for me, but with fear of the fallout. She repeated Madison's threat that if I took this to court, Madison would reveal whatever she claimed to know about me. I told her the only things Madison had were things she stole. My mother fell silent, then finally whispered that Noah couldn't handle what was coming if I pushed forward. It was the same script I'd heard my entire life. I was expected to fold so others wouldn't face consequences. I said nothing. I didn't tell anyone when I drove to Noah's house that night. Only my attorney knew to stay ready. But when I reached the driveway, I stopped short. My father stood at the doorstep with a suitcase in hand. He looked at me with a tired resolve I had never seen in him. He said he wasn't willing to leave me to face this alone, that he had already walked out of the house, for the first time in years. He chose me. I checked into a small motel outside Austin with my father in the room next door. I spread every piece of evidence across the table and played the recording of Madison arguing with Noah again. A faint click in the background caught my attention, the tap of a phone screen. I sent the audio to a tech specialist, who confirmed someone had been secretly filming during the argument. The device had the signature mic profile of an iPhone 12. Madison's phone. She had recorded her own leverage, digging deeper into the plane's logistics folder. I found another red flag. The EIN she used belonged to a dissolved shell company from Oklahoma. She hadn't bothered creating anything new, just hijacked a dead business to give her fraud a heartbeat. Before I could process that, my email lit up with another alert. Someone attempted a $12,000 withdrawal on a loan tied to my stolen details. The IP traced back to Noah's house again. I called him. He answered breathless. Chaos crashing in the background. He begged me to come, confessing he didn't know how to stop her or how to leave. Madison's voice erupted behind him, promising to make my entire family hate me. His final whisper he was afraid of her hit harder than anything else. I called the police and headed to his neighborhood. Neighbors were outside, watching Madison stagger across the porch, screaming accusations into the night. Officers stepped in, and Noah stumbled toward me, eyes hollow, apologizing for letting it all happen. I couldn't find words to answer him. As they placed Madison in the patrol car, she glared at me through the window, her voice cutting through the noise. "You think you've won? I have something on you too." An officer reached into her bag and pulled out a USB identical to the one my father gave me. 2 identical drives. 2 versions of the truth. My father had only given me half the story. Madison had kept the other half, and whatever she held could be far worse than anything she'd already done. I picked up the last stack of documents from where my parents were staying. then drove toward Round Rock under the kind of Texas heat that made the air feel like it was buzzing. My cousin's backyard was already alive with noise country music, crackling grills, kids racing through the grass. No one expected me. The moment I stepped through the gate, conversations thinned to a hush. Noah stood beside the picnic table, pale and drawn, looking like he'd been holding his breath for hours. I didn't greet anyone. I set my canvas bag on the long checkered table and began laying out each piece the 34-page investigation report, the fraudulent loan file, the 20 password resets, the hijacked EIN, the photo of Madison's SUV shadowing me, the bank withdrawals into her account, the recording of her coaching Noah to use my SSN, the photo of the ransacked cabin box, paper after paper. The yard grew quieter. Someone finally asked what all of it was. I told them these were the things I'd kept silent about for 6 months. Noah dropped into a chair. His face went ghost white. I played the recording, Madison calmly instructing him to use my identity. A stillness fell over the yard, sharp and heavy. A relative repeated Madison's claim that I'd ruined her startup. I slid forward the $8,200 charge made under my name. Another mentioned her story about me sabotaging their marriage. I held up the photo of her watching me from that SUV. My mother tried to shut the folder. My father stopped her, saying this wasn't a family matter anymore. Noah stood, eyes swollen, asking if I'd ever hated him. I told him I didn't hate anyone, but I wouldn't let anyone use my name to destroy my life. Then I placed the USB from my father beside the identical one found in Madison's bag. I said hers held a second recording, and it didn't harm me. It harmed Noah. Just then, my phone vibrated with an email from my attorney. Madison had hired a lawyer and claimed she had proof Noah acted willingly. All eyes turned to him, and the truth stood alone. After the gathering in Round Rock, I spent the next morning with my attorney assembling everything into a single airtight case. By noon, we had filed state identity fraud charges, a federal complaint for the attempted breach of my firm's financial systems, a request for a 5-year identity protection order, and motions to audit every account tied to Noah and Madison. We submitted the forged contracts, the hacked EIN trail, the recordings, the photos, the IP logs, every piece of their damage laid out in black and white. Madison was detained for questioning. Noah was released for cooperating. That night, my mother called. Her voice carried no pleading, only exhaustion. She said if I pushed forward, Noah would carry a criminal record forever. I told her if I didn't, I'd lose the life I'd spent years building. Her silence stretched long enough to feel like something breaking for good. A week later, my firm restored my access and issued a commendation for containing a security threat. It was the first recognition I'd ever received that wasn't followed by someone taking advantage of me. Around the same time, Noah sent a message saying I was the only one who'd ever saved him, but he was afraid to face me. I let the notification fade. Madison was charged in Dallas, Austin, and Denver. She missed her hearings, triggering a civil warrant. Forensic analysts confirmed she'd tried to doctor the second USB to frame Noah, but the metadata exposed her. She had tightened the noose herself. One evening, as the Rockies turned violet outside my office window, my father's email arrived. He wrote that he and my mother had separated, she had chosen Noah, and he could no longer defend what was wrong. The Finch family didn't fall apart because of me. It fell apart because the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. 8 months later, everything had shifted into its final shape. Madison was ordered to pay a staggering sum in damages. Noah's bankruptcy became official. My mother moved in with extended relatives, clinging to whatever story hurt her the least, while my father quietly settled into a small rental not far from my place in Colorado. One winter morning, I stepped onto my balcony and watched snow fall over the city like a soft reset. There were no more desperate calls, no more accusations, no more pretending I was responsible for holding everyone together. I opened an email to my attorney, asking to extend my identity protection order for 5 more years. It wasn't fear guiding my fingers, it was certainty. I closed the laptop, brewed mint tea, and let the warmth spread through my chest. I'd spent decades trying to fit into a family that never made room for me. And this year, I finally understood healing doesn't come from proving anyone wrong. It comes from letting go. I looked down at the busy streets of Denver, alive beneath the morning light. I am Aurelia Finch, and I am finally, undeniably free.